see you all. I want to welcome all of the students and also welcome people from the community who might be dropping in to see what we're all about. This lecture is one that we have presented several times. Each time, Professor Bittner says, "You've heard this all before," and yet I seem to, on some level, be able to hear something new in what he has to say, and he's one of our best lecturers. Otherwise, I wouldn't ask him to come back.
Thank you.
Right. So, Dr. Stephen Bittner, who probably will want you to, right?
That's true. Yeah.
He lives in Santa Rosa, married, and has 2 children. He's written 2 books, The Many Lives of Khrushchev's Thaw, which is about a neighborhood in Moscow during the Khrushchev regime, and also Greenwich Village, I forget the second one.
The Kremlin Scholar.
The Kremlin Scholar, right. There we go. Which is about a high-ranking Soviet official who got himself into some trouble because he tried to do some regime change. His newest project is a very exciting one. We've talked about it. And he spent a balmy winter break in Odessa, Russia, and Steve is studying winemaking on the Crimea and in Georgia. He's quite a citizens of the Soviet Union. Okay? So what this means is that this was fundamentally an event that occurred on Soviet territory. And it's also true that the heartland of European Jewry, so that part of Europe where most Jews lived, was located in the Soviet Union. It's the territories that used to be called the Pale of Settlement, where Jews by Tsarist law were confined. And today the old Pale of Settlement is located in Ukraine, in Belarus, and in the Baltic Republic of Lithuania. So I guess that qualifies me to speak to you today about the Holocaust. Now, if I were to ask you what the Holocaust is, or what the Holocaust was, I am confident that nearly everybody, if not everybody in this class, could answer that question successfully. Right? The Holocaust was the event where German's famous living historian of the Holocaust, a professor in Tel Aviv named Yehuda Bauer, has pointed out that this term, anti-Semitism, is stupid. In fact, that's how he describes it. It's a stupid term. In other words, there is no doctrine of Semitism to be opposed to. So how can there be a thing called anti-Semitism? Now, nonetheless, in common usage, anti-Semitism refers to animosity towards Jews, but interestingly, not toward other Semitic peoples, like Arabs. Okay? Now, in some forms, anti-Semitism is as old as Christianity itself. Many verses in the New Testament strike the reader, the modern reader, as anti-Semitic. There's a reason for this. They probably reflected tensions in the early Christian church between Jews that embraced the new religion and Jews that resisted the new religion, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, or even sometimes communism. So you may have noticed that there's a contradiction here. Some people see Jews as being greedy capitalists, and other people see Jews as being nefarious communists. And oftentimes these seemingly oxymoronic stereotypes were held by the same people. So how can you be a greedy capitalist and a conniving communist? Well, this is what the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman calls the viscosity of Jewish identity. Right? And viscosity is this word we normally use in regards to motor oil. It is a measure of slipperiness.
And Bauman, I think, rightly points out that historically Jewish identity has always been a very slippery thing. That is, it's easy for anti-Semites to perceive Jews as arch-capitalists, greedy. The point is, in nations, these are states that base their right to exist upon the national group. Okay? So I'm just going to read through a list here of the nations that become independent and when they become independent. And this is probably beyond the scope of what you need to note in your notebook. But you should be aware that this is one of the cardinal events of European history over the 19th century. Okay, so Serbia becomes an independent nation state in 1815. Greece in 1829. Romania in 1859. Italy in 1861. Germany in 1871. Bulgaria in 1878. Albania in 1912. Czechoslovakia in 1918, and that's an unusual one because that's a state that is comprised of two nations, the Czechs and the Slovaks. And then along with Czechoslovakia, all the new states that were spawned by the first. But these statistics illustrate the idea that violence was necessary. Okay, so those are the sort of broad structural developments that I think paved the way for the Holocaust. And so now I'm going to move on to the specific events that brought the Nazis to power in 1933. Okay? Well, Nazi success built upon the failures of German liberalism. And this word liberal means something very different today than it meant 70 years ago or 150 years ago. Liberalism used to refer to respect for the free market and respect for civil liberties. Okay? And in the wake of the German defeat in the First World War, the modern German state is reconstituted as a liberal democracy, what we call the Weimar Republic. And it's called the Weimar Republic because this democracy was proclaimed in the city of Weimar. Need for expansion on the other. Okay, so how exactly did Hitler come to power? Well, it was almost by accident. Despite their impressive showings in the 1930 Reichstag elections, they still played second fiddle to the largest party in German politics, the Social Democrats, the center-left party. By 1932, the Nazis had become the largest party in terms of representation in the Reichstag. But it was still far from a majority. So there are 611 seats total. In 1932, the Nazis occupied 230 of those seats. And there's even some evidence that suggests that at the end of 1932 and the beginning of 1933, the Nazi phenomenon was beginning to wane. And so in other words, the Nazis were beginning to lose some electoral that he's treaty with the Vatican and with Pope Pius XI. And in this treaty, Pope Pius XI gave his stamp of approval to Nazism in return for a promise from Hitler that the Nazis will respect the traditional confessional liberties that Catholics had enjoyed in Germany, because Catholics were in a confessional minority in Germany. But whatever the case, Hitler's assurances to Pope Pius XI that he would respect Catholic confessional liberties proved entirely worthless. Over the course of the 1930s, the Nazis ruthlessly attacked Catholic schools and Catholic youth groups. Eventually, Pope Pius XI decided that the 1933 treaty was a terrible mistake. And in 1937, he writes an encyclical. Encyclical is a papal document. Spelled demise could be planned. In July of 1941, Hermann Göring, at Hitler's command, issued the fateful order for the mass murder of Jews. And in the order, it is phrased as a total solution to the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence in Europe. Then the following January, January of 1942, Nazi leaders met in a Berlin suburb, Wannsee, to map out plans to deport Jews to camps specially equipped to exterminate large numbers of people in an efficient manner. Execution by machine gun was deemed too inefficient and too costly. The preferred method was the gas chamber, and this had several advantages. After death, dental fillings could be removed before corpses were burned in crematoria. The bones and ashes could be used for fertilizers. Unique form of German nationalism, affected as it was by Romantic thought, Herder, Wagner. You could read Hitler's Mein Kampf, find this kernel of the Holocaust, the Nuremberg laws, and so on and so on. So in other words, the Nazis had a master plan to destroy the Jews from day one. And once they were in power, they acted on that plan. Okay, so that's the intentionalist view of the Holocaust. The functionalists argue that there was no master plan. Although they do recognize that the deep anti-Semitism of Nazi leaders, they argue that there was no master plan until quite late in the game to eradicate Jews. They argue that the Holocaust instead was the result of a specific confluence of events. And you can almost think of this, I think, as an hourglass. There was some, if you think it's perfectly okay, there's no reason to speak euphemistically about it.
So people knew something was happening, and, you know, it's human nature, maybe to just deny it. But if you had a Jewish neighbor, and you woke up one morning and they were gone, wouldn't you wonder where they were and what happened to them and look after them? So it wasn't, you know, there wasn't TMZ going to people's houses and saying, what happened to these people?
I'm impressed you know about TMZ. Do you know who Perez Hilton is?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
Well, I noticed that not once did you mention the word appeasement in your lecture, and I was particularly struck by several moments of appeasement. Hindenburg's appeasement to Hitler with chancellorship.
If you're interested in anything, you can look us up. We have a fan page on Facebook, and we're building our website, and we need any ideas as possible and as much people to come and do this as possible, because it's when we fight together that we actually make a difference. We can't do it in small groups. It needs to be a huge group.
Okay,
And
so that's 7 o'clock,
7 o'clock,
3004A.
yep, in Stevenson.
You're the second student to approach me about that today. Somebody came by my office and gave me the same spiel, and I jokingly suggested immolation. I had just been reading about Jan Bloch, the Czech student who immolates himself in the face of the Soviet invasion of Prague in '68.
Right.
I think she
Thank you very
didn't think
much.
it funny. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious about the context in which you describe anti-Semitism and data in the framework of the period of time.
You know, the kind of white upper class establishment were not passing them along, or if they were passing them to Breckinridge, he wasn't doing anything. And it wasn't until Hans Morgenthau, who was Jewish, and one of Roosevelt's very trusted advisors, found out what was happening. He said to Roosevelt, you have to do something. And it was at that point that they started bringing some Jews who were in liberated Italy to the United States.
Well, I recognize it. It's a morally fraught issue. You know this, and when I was leveling blame, I said nobody ever attempted to bomb the camps. But that would be a difficult decision to undertake. You are in fact condemning the people who are in the camps if you bomb them.
We had a very prominent Holocaust historian by the name of Michael Berenbaum,